In episode 12.3 of Airs for Architecture, I spoke with Keller Easterling, architect, writer, and professor at Yale University, about her 2021 book, Medium Design, Knowing How to Work on the World, published by Verso.
Airs for Architecture, a podcast about architecture, buildings, urban culture, and space.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Airs for Architecture. I'm talking today to Professor Keller Easterling. Professor, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself?
I'm Keller Easterling. I am an author and designer, professor at Yale University.
And an author and a designer, which came first, the authoring or the designing?
Well, I suppose I suppose that my reputation is as being an author. I'm best known as being an author, but I think of I prize the work of design, and I think of everyone as a designer in a particular way in any discipline.
I think that's a very interesting point, and it's something I've been pondering since encountering your work and your book. But I think we can come to that. Where did you train? Did you train as a designer, or are you a native designer, so to speak?
Well, I did train as a designer in that I went to school and got the degree that I ostensibly have as an architect. But I feel that the only real training I got that was worth anything was in theater. So I think all I've really done is transpose a theater training to architecture.
Okay. What does that mean? What does that mean? Is that in the sort of, and you're probably bridle at this, but in the Leon Krier sense of thinking about the city as a space that frames everyday lives of human beings, or is it in a more kind of detailed and directorial way?
Well, I suppose it's just that when you're working in theater, you are working with infinitive expressions. You don't work with nominative expressions. You don't go on stage saying, I'm going to play being a mother. You can't do that. You play that you're smothering your son, or you're rejecting your daughter, or you're doing whatever. You put it. The cliche technique of acting, is that you put it in active terms, and so actors are up to their elbows in, and quite practically so, up to their elbows in actions. Like, actions are the thing they're working with. That's the clay, that's the medium. And so in a way, while architects are trained to make things with shapes and outlines, and so we're good at geometry. I know how to do all that stuff too. But the kinds of forms that I've been putting forward are more in an active register. They are verbs more than they are nouns.
That's a really beautiful way of putting it, and I've never thought about that in relation to acting before. Actions are the things actors are working with. It's a very nice way of putting it, and it does really touch on the way that this particular book, Medium Design, Knowing How to Work on the World, kind of addresses it. Perhaps you might want to introduce medium design and its slightly subversive byline, I suppose. Not how to work in the world, but how to work on the world, which I think kind of unsettling immediately. But what was the origins and motivations of this? I mean, as you say, working in the theatre, so you're thinking there about the, as you put it, the things that they're working on, actions. Does the book itself have roots within that idea as the urban environment or the built environment or cultural environment as a as a not object orientated practice?
Yes. And I'm an urbanist. I work on, I mean, even within my discipline, I would be described as an urbanist, but not exclusively an urbanist.
Mm-hmm.
So I know an urbanist is thinking about the interplay between things, not just the design of objects, although, we have to know about that too. So the medium, in a way, is space, but looking at the interplay, the dispositions, the potentials of different arrangements in space, and looking at how one can be designing that interplay as well as just designing objects. So designing the way things go together, designing the way things, or setting up potentials for the way things might interact, even if they're not, of course, no one is the author of urbanism. The people who are making urbanism are the authors of urbanism, but you can set up potentials that in that environment make some things more possible and some things less possible, or provide resources or richness for that interplay.
Yeah, I like this idea. And why this book now, though? What? Obviously, you are compelled by your personal disposition to write books, but what was and this book published in 2021, what was the kind of instrumental factor in developing it? I mean, was this something that sprung out of both the COVID crisis and other social crises, or is this a sort of reflection on a reality that you've seen emerging?
Well, I think all my work has really been about this, about working on the spaces in between, about seeing things and seeing form as, for a long time been writing about what I would call active form. So forms that work on chemistry, interplay, chain reactions, inflecting populations of objects, not just making one object. So this is something that's running through the whole of my work. And I decided that maybe I should just have the courage to go ahead, and not courage, but I should.
Well, I think courage is quite an interesting word, because I asked in my provocations that I sent you this, which you probably didn't get more than 20 minutes ago, but this idea of it as a manifesto, and I think you eschew the idea in the introduction that it is a manifesto, but it does have that kind of ethical bent to it as a piece of work. Compare it to, say, Extra Statecraft, which was published in 2014. In the intervening 9 years, I guess a lot has happened. A lot of significant events have happened, which perhaps have made the imperative of this idea that you're articulating feel more imminent, necessary. Is that fair?
Well, I mean, I would, of course, resist the word manifesto. I probably said it's not a manifesto if I don't even use the word, but because what seemed really crucial was, and now seems even more crucial, and I wish that the book had sort of expressed it more directly, but at a moment when we're kind of trying to look past the last 500 years of colonizing, capitalizing, globalizing, to see what kind of knowledge has been eclipsed, or to get out of certain kind of modern Enlightenment habits of mind. This just seems to be a kind of perennial problem that culture has, that it's not able to get past those habits of mind that are so constraining. And so the book is titled Medium Design, Knowing How to Work on the World, but I place the emphasis on the knowing how part. I actually don't really like the subtitle because it makes it sound like I'm trying to make a manifesto, like I'm trying to tell you what to do or something like that. And that's not the tone. I do use the second person, you, but it's as a gentle, as a kind of companion to the reader to discuss knowing how as opposed to knowing that. I'm borrowing from Gilbert Ryle here, that not knowing that as in knowing the right answer, but knowing how as something that is about knowing how, being able to manage an unfolding disposition or set of affordances for which there is no singular solution. But a lot of practical knowledge, and something that is taking place over time. And it was crucial to me to say that while this is something that we do all the time, everybody is managing potentials in their lives, even though it might remain underexpressed. It is important to me to say that to not pay attention to that underexpressed or under-rehearsed capacity that we all have to do that is dangerous, and to be able to talk about it is to increase our capacities to operate, and part of that is also moving away just from the declarations of ideology, to see what exists in that other dimension, that other active, undeclared dimension. When I was saying about actors, like the mother that's coming on to murder her son is saying, "I love you, son." So being able to see the distinction between the declaration and what is actually happening, what's actually playing out in an environment.
Very interesting proposition, and I enjoy it a lot. Strangely enough, I was speaking to my one of my daughters last night, and she was asking, we were talking about, she does philosophy and religion at school. She's only 14. And she was saying, I don't know what the point of my education is. And I was trying to express this idea that the point, at least she said, I don't know what I'm learning here. And I was like, well, are you capable of understanding things more? And it's that knowing what rather than knowing how rather than knowing what, which is the kind of function of a good education. It's just very difficult, I think, for contemporary people to get their head around that. And you kind of, in the introduction to the book, you kind of unpack that really forcefully, that we've become, through this modern paradigm, through this modern mode of this modern deportment, we've become obsessed, almost particularly, I suppose, as designers and architects, by the object and by the solution, the fix, the artifact, rather than, as you suggest, a kind of an interrelationship, an emergent assemblage of events. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, I'm amazed that I managed to get that right, because it's complicated, or it seems complicated to me. But as I say, very, very sort of very elegant idea, and it has, as I said, this kind of ethical imperative. I mean, in what chapter is it? Some violence does not happen. In chapter 5, there's this engagement with structural violence. Why do you engage with that right at the very end? I wanted to know, not quite at the very end, there's an afterthought, but why then? Why not position it at the beginning and say, this is the condition. Structural violence is the sort of foundational level of it all, of modernist capitalist society.
Hmm. That's interesting. Well, I tried to set out a series of things that were different on the other side of these modern Enlightenment logics. If you could escape them, what's different? And one of the things that's different is that, and there were sort of several things that I felt were kind of inverted logics. And then the book just kind of takes those inverted logics in turn. One of the inverted logics is, the kind of like being right is a really bad idea. It's a really weak idea. Another inverted logic is that rather than a kind of modern succession of technologies where the next technology is smarter than the one before, and the one after kills the one before, that one is looking at an emergent technologies, and that the innovation is not the new technology, but the relationship between existing and emergent technologies. And another inverted logic was the way that violence in these environments is not with a gunshot or a drawn sword, but with potentials and attritions. It's the way that large organizations poison and punish and erase you, not with a gun, but with fossil fuels and bad air and water and murderous policing and data monopolies and
feeding you terrible food.
Yeah. So the reason I was trying to sort of keep all of those inverted logics in play throughout, and talk about contents of violence in organizations throughout. Like there's an opening discussion at the beginning of the preface that's talking about the way this capacity to think about the interplay, about the disposition, is something we do all the time. And I was giving an example of a parent with squabbling children, that the parent with squabbling children doesn't try to litigate the argument that the children are having, but goes around, opening a window, moving a chair into the light, putting in pet in the arm of one child, introducing blood sugar into another, that you're working on things, you're working on dulling the potentials for violence in the room. And that's what I'm trying to find ways to do that as a designer.
It's a very interesting concept. So the medium in medium design, could you perhaps explain that a little bit more? It's the stuff of infrastructure. It's the stuff in between stuff. It's the not stuff in between stuff. It's dark matter. I mean, it's the kind of action of the parent it's the picking up of the puppy and putting it in the arms of the agitated child.
Yes, all those things. I mean, I get very nervous about there being a name for what it is I'm talking about. I don't think there needs to be a term. And I have been saying that this is something that is not new or right. It's something, that would be the manifesto. That would be the old modern habit of mind that would say something like that. Instead, I am saying this is something, as it turns out, you already know. It's something that you're doing all day long, like the parent. You already know how to do it. It's a blind spot that's just right in front of you, maybe, because there's so much emphasis on having the right answer and having the Turing complete world and having the quantifiable expression and knowing that and so on, that these very important capacities are underexpressed. But the medium, and it's a little bit dangerous to have called it that in a way, because I've always been using the term that had something to do with the in-between, with the medium. And I thought enthusiastically that my media theory colleagues would love it if architecture and the people who know about space would pick up the other end of a project that media theorists are also thinking about media, not just as restricted to telecommunications and so on, but as elemental media, air, earth, fire, water, and also expanding to think about so many things. And I thought that there's also many other disciplines who are thinking outside of object to think about medium. An oncologist isn't just looking at the tumor, but is looking at kind of chemical fluctuations in the surrounding tissue. And, you could go on and on, that many people who are stretching their discipline are stretching it into this kind of active rather than nominative register. So I wanted to join those people stretching their discipline and call all of us designers. And medium is a word that I'm using that is returning back to its root, medius, meaning middle, or milieu.
Okay, so we're all designers. I mean, from this idea, one assumes when you talk about design that you don't mean the formal aesthetic practices that we teach in architecture schools in the design studio, what is normally characterized as being design, but instead are thinking about, you're talking about, as you say, the disposition in the world, which is designerly, which is to say about building productive relationships between entities.
Yes, I mean, I think a designer is someone who is not happy only with reportage or with measuring, more precisely measuring our doom, but would like to get some of this material, between their hands, is thinking about doing some kind of operation on this material. And that, that could be someone in any discipline who's thinking about putting things together in a different way. And what we teach in our discipline, sometimes called architecture or urbanism or something, is incredibly valuable and undervalued, I think, in culture, underexploited in culture. Sometimes, and it's our fault in a way, we've taken these exceptional skills we have to see these kinds of potentials acting out in space, and they're kind of restricted to a profession and a set of professional activities, and taking nothing away from those professional activities, but the skills that we have, I would say, exceed that realm. That is, in my mind, almost seems like a cul-de-sac in a much bigger field in which we could operate and apply this training.
Yeah, I agree. And we talk about it quite a lot when we're sort of plotting design courses. I'm doing so at the moment, where we talk about the kind of value or the knowledge that because most people who start architecture school don't go on to become architects. The vast majority don't. And on a certain level, that looks like failure, because if 95% of people who started medical school didn't become doctors, you'd think something was up. but it's about 95% of architecture. People who start architecture schools don't become architects, but they do often go into these other disciplines. And I do wonder about what it is, this mysterious thing that we teach them, and how we teach them seems to do something. It's quite amazing. But I wanted to come to the kind of philosophical underpinnings of what you're writing about here. I mean, there's a strong postmodern tendency, well, a strong postmodern kind of sense in what you're writing about. And certainly in your first chapter, You Know More, You Can Tell, you certainly outline a number of theorists who fit within that epoch. Is that how you see it? Is this an extension of postmodern theory, or is this a departure from it? Are we beyond the postmodern?
I would say that it's a departure from it, to the extent that postmodern is kind of modern. Like it's in a sense that postmodern is modeling, is molding itself still on the modern, and to say one is postmodern is a very modern thing to say. So
I know what you mean, but I guess what I've been thinking about recently, I've been thinking about this use of this word truth that people have started using again. There's a lot of truth going about at the moment. There's, first of all, the idea of fake news, which is a remarkable concept in a postmodern sense, in a postmodern reading of it. And then there's kind of the idea that there should be some form of curtailment on untruth, or misinformation or disinformation or fake news or whatever it is. So it's like truth has come screaming back into the debate without anybody really noticing. And it seemed to me that the door had shut on that postmodern moment where, I don't know, we're going to have to find arbiters of truth all of a sudden, which is very complicated. And I was just wondering whether what you're not doing in your critique of modernism is saying that which came before modernism, or modernity, or whatever it is, or the modern, is what we need to be looking back towards, which would be a traditionalist kind of new urbanist kind of approach, perhaps. But you're not also saying we just need to do it harder. We need more modernism, or we need to do modernism correctly. Like, what's gone wrong is that we've done modernism badly. But instead you're saying there's this completely alternative path. There's a totally different way of perceiving the world. And I was wondering whether you'd like to talk about that, but also what the lineage of that kind of line of reasoning is.
Well, there's so much there.
Sorry. Maybe start with the lineage.
Part of the reason for, I mean, I suppose you earlier asked, why now? Why talk about medium design now? And you talk about truth. And I think one of the reasons for it was to look at the ways in which political superbugs operate, to expose them. And those moments where we are declaring the truth and bringing truth to power and coming with a singular enemy and a singular solution and a singular ideological remedy, noticing how easy that makes it for the political superbug to run rings around us. I mean, it goes back to Musil and paraphrasing here, that stupidity has truth at a disadvantage, because it can put on all the guises of truth. It can tell a million lies, whereas truth only is limited to truth. And so the way in which political superbugs operate on temperament, the way in which they tell a million lies, the ways in which they create that kind of structural or environmental violence we were talking about before. I was asking, as an activist, what do we have? What do we have to work against them? If we fight, with raised fist, do we give them the rancor that they thrive on? How do we outwit the superbug that manages to operate on this kind of environmental way in the media, and in the media proper, and in the medium that I'm talking about. And so in a way, like looking for that capacity to see with a split screen what people are saying and what they're doing, the difference between someone who pretends to be a populist leader while they concentrate power, so almost being able to hear what people are saying, then turn the sound down and see the disposition of the organization they're creating, that they're saying, I'm spreading my power among you, while they're creating a hub and spoke, centrality, and rehearsing that habit of mind on everything, kind of turning the sound down on the declarations of ideology to see which ones might be talking about decentralization while they centralize, or looking at social media that purports to be information rich while it threads everything through a binary of likes and dislikes that makes it violent and information poor. Just continually being able to see that distinction in organization, and then also being able to operate in some of these registers so that you can be sneaky enough to outwit the superbug.
In terms of the built environment, these superbugs look like what? Is this the kind of environments of neoliberal and globalized capitalism which has promised emancipatory potential and delivered it very little?
Yeah.
Is that what you're shooting at? Is it that, or is it something more? It's not the stuff of architecture, or is it?
Well, obviously, again, I didn't say it, but because it seemed like it was too obvious to say, but a kind of
I like really obvious things. So
a kind of Trumpian character is, as one of the reasons for this book, the Trumpian character that is not gone and that is always with us, that can manage to, that knows how lies work, that knows how to, that knows that reason and truth are that knows how to make truth slip and slide on a whole set of lies.
So it's for Trump, might we say Le Corbusier, or I don't know, Robert Moses? I mean, is that where we get to in terms of architectural production, or are you specifically seeing the sort of the medium, so to speak, well, as you call it, the medium as being the way that architecture is communicated, so that it's you mentioned Foucault and this idea of apparatus, or the dispositive, this idea of the kind of the language of it, but also the stuff between the language of it. Is that what we're talking about here? Are we not talking about buildings at all?
Well, I would say that this superbug is, you could say that this superbug is kind of, a figure like Trump or Bolsonaro, or, take your pick of kind of political strongman. Or you could say that it's like some of the spatial environments that I've tried to study, like the free zone, for instance, a paradigm, a kind of neoliberal paradigm that a lot of people don't really know about, but that is a spatial apparatus for enacting the tenets of neoliberalism, and without understanding how that free zone works, you don't really even see the giant physical plants of neoliberalism, the engine room of neoliberalism, and how it operates, and the ways in which it's managed to again create a series of fairy tales and stories while it insulates itself from any kind of legal reconciliation. It's found a way, just like Trump or others find a way to not tell one lie, that doesn't work, but tell many lies that creates a kind of Teflon on which reasonable people start to slip and slide. And the free zone is another one of those environments.
You mentioned sort of social media environments as well earlier.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. So in a way, the medium design that you propose is a way of engaging with that in a subversive manner.
Yes. It's trying to provide activists with another, and this is something I've long been thinking about, is trying to extend activist tools. And that's not to say that activism, doesn't almost always begin with marching, resisting, blockading, boycotting, fighting, any forms of insurgency that we're familiar with. Power doesn't change without that kind of pressure, and it often takes the form of opposition. But I also want to expand our ways of operating so that we're able to do the same things that the superbug can sometimes do, keep everybody confused and disoriented. I want to disorient the superbug. I want to say that our activism is pretty weak if it just says there's one and only one way to do activism and I have the answer and so on. That just makes it too easy for the superbugs to outwit us. But to keep them starved of the fight they sometimes crave, to keep them disoriented, to keep them guessing with multiple techniques, some of which don't declare themselves, that's what I think maybe gives an edge in these environments where sometimes resistance of a certain kind doesn't seem to work.
So if the architect or the designer, if the designer is everybody, what becomes of the designer? And I suppose, and it's something I've had mentioned to me before, no one pays for an activist.
No one pays for what? Sorry.
No one pays for an activist.
An activist.
So activism doesn't pay the bill. So there's a kind of problem right at the heart of this, which is part of, critical problem, I suppose, the wicked problem, which is that no one's going to pay to be educated to be a designer that doesn't get paid. So I just wonder how we can, although, and I take a point that the situation to hand demands new ways of doing architecture. How do we teach this particular? How might we go about engaging young minds with the idea of medium design? How do they start doing it?
I mean, I'm not going to pretend that this is easy. I'll say in studios where we work this way, it's the most natural thing in the world to work this way. And I would say, again, this is nothing new. Like the best designers in the world have always worked this way. They always can see all of those other potentials. But they haven't been engaged to think about it in the way that we're doing, engaged to think about it in a way that is absolutely relevant today. It's really seeing what's on the other side of those last 500 years. It's sympathetic with Black feminist, anarchist, environmentalist, abolitionist thinkers. It's absolutely can find many partners in the world, especially now as we go through different kinds of cultural sea changes. So I think then, I mean, it's very obvious in a design studio that this works. If you looked at the wall of my design studios, you would see everything from construction details to things that look like buildings to many other things, but just a way of applying a kind of intelligence in a broader and more relevant way, more broadly relevant, that's not just waiting for a highly capitalized client to give you a job. Architects, designers, incredibly smart, correlative thinkers. So I'm not speaking to every student, but I'm speaking to those students who would like to use their training outside of a profession that's just waiting for a client, and who wants to make coalitions with other kinds of people to pursue that relevance in other ways. So not a client-based, not this traditional client-based. Of course, people may ask you to study something or do something. You may be the inventor of something. You may sometimes in these different coalitions be sustained by grants from the sciences, grants from other areas. In architecture, we get grants of like $5,000. The scientists get grants of multi-million dollars to study things. And what I'm trying to do is put the architect more in the center of those interdisciplinary crossroads. I mean, certainly in a university, trying to say that it's the knowledge that we have, spatial knowledge, not that we should be going to get, business degrees and science degrees, but that people from business and science should be seeing what we do and be thinking about spatial practices as absolutely crucial to the emergencies that we're in right now. So no longer just happy to measure in parts per million, our doom, but like really looking for ways to hammer out changes in cross-disciplinary coalitions.
Perfect. Wonderful point to finish on. Thank you very much, Keller.
Thank you. Pleasure.
The medium is the message. Keller's right. Thanks to Professor Easterling for speaking so well, and to Verso for the book. The podcast description has the details and links as per usual. Follow up on them, why don't you? And thanks for listening.